Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Monday the 28th of October in London. I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, Keir Starmer will warn that the UK faces the harsh light of fiscal reality as he prepares the ground for a budget focused on tax hikes and extra borrowing. The price of oil slumps after Israel limits its strikes on Iran to military targets. Plus, are the Mag 7 becoming the Meh 7? Big tech stocks lose some of their aura as earnings growth slows. Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. The Prime Minister Keir Starmer says his government will embrace fiscal reality as he prepares a budget that will define UK politics for the rest of the decade. The Labour leader is aiming to stabilise Britain's public finances through as much as £40 billion of tax hikes and spending cuts. His party pledged in its manifesto that it wouldn't increase taxes on, quote, working people. The director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, Paul Johnson, says it means businesses will be hit instead.
If you need to raise 40 billion, you have to do something with income tax, national insurance or VAT. There is simply no sensible way of raising that sorts of money without raising one of those taxes. And the way that the Chancellor is getting round her pledge is to say it didn't apply to the employer chunk of national insurance.
The IFF's as Paul Johnson there. UK government borrowing costs have risen in recent days in response to signals that the government intends to loosen its fiscal rules to fund investment. Well, the budget's intended to tackle the major issues facing the UK economy. New data from the recruitment site Indeed shows job postings in London remain 25% lower than they were before the pandemic, as hybrid working has trimmed demand for shop assistants and baristas near offices. Turning next to oil prices falling by more than 5% at the start of Monday trading after Israeli strikes against Iran avoided the OPEC members' crude facilities. Brent traded below $73 a barrel and West Texas Intermediate was near $68 a barrel after pairing some losses. The moves lower come as oil majors Exxon, Chevron, Shell, Total Energy and BP are collectively expected to post a 12% profit decline from the second quarter when they report earnings this week. That would leave all but Shell unable to cover their dividends and buybacks with free cash flow, which is expected to be 30% lower than a year ago. The yen has weakened to a 3-month low against the dollar after Japan's ruling coalition failed to win a majority in parliament. The country now faces a period of political instability as the country's two main political blocs race to form a government. According to Japan's constitution, a special session of parliament must be held within 30 days of a general election to choose a prime minister. Here's Bloomberg TV anchor Sherry Ann in Tokyo.
Polls were showing that the ruling coalition would lose its majority. That's what happened. We're talking about the Liberal Democratic Party and its partner Komeito falling short of that 233 seats that they needed in Parliament. And that, of course, will make a big difference on whether or not Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba can actually hold on to his job when there is a parliamentary vote. And we've heard from him already talking about really public anger over what he called the funds issue. Remember, there's a lot of resentment here among the Japanese public, given how party members were enriching themselves.
Bloomberg's Sherry Ann referring there to revelations last year that Liberal Democratic Party supporters had systematically failed to declare donations from supporters. Sources tell Bloomberg Boeing is planning to launch a capital raise as early as today. Earlier this month, the US aerospace giant announced plans to slash its global workforce by about 10% as an ongoing strike continues to hit the firm's bottom line. More now from Bloomberg's Charlie Pallett.
It's an offering that would help the beleaguered airplane maker boost its liquidity. One of the sources says the company is set to raise more than $15 billion from the fundraising, adding that the amount could still rise depending on demand. Last week, the company got clearance from the SEC to sell as much as $25 billion of equity and debt, a move that could help Boeing avoid having its credit rating downgraded to junk. Boeing needs the capital infusion to maintain its investment-grade rating and fund its eventual recovery from a crippling strike. In New York, Charlie Pallett, Bloomberg Radio.
And the stock market dominance of tech companies like Apple and Nvidia may be set to wane. This earnings season, firms that drove the S&P rally appear to be in the back seat. Bloomberg's Tio Adebayo has the story.
Slowing profits are hitting some of the stock market's technology giants as they prepare to report earnings this week. According to Bloomberg Intelligence, 5 of the largest S&P firms are projected to post average earnings growth of 19% in third quarter results. That would be their slowest collective expansion in 6 quarters. The gap between big tech and the rest of the market is also expected to continue to narrow into 2025. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
Now, in a moment, we'll bring you more on what to expect from this week's budget in the UK, plus get more details on what's happening on the oil markets. But a word first on another story that caught my eye on how a DJ became an unlikely champion for green farming. So our colleague Charlotte Hughes-Morgan has been speaking to Andy Cattos, half of the DJ duo Groove Armada, who, alongside his music career, has become one of the UK's most prominent voices, calling for an overhaul of how the world produces its food. So over the past 6 years, he's built a network of more than 100 farmers in the UK and France growing wheat using what's known as regenerative farming methods. He's also convinced some of the biggest retailers here in the UK, as well as restaurant chains, to pay a premium for flour and bread that's made from this wheat under the brand Wild Farm. He's been getting involved too in public education campaigns about what regenerative agriculture could mean as a climate solution for farming, making crops and soil more resilient to things like weather shock, and also protecting soil, water and biodiversity. Charlotte has been looking into both how this method is being used and what Andy Catto has to say about it. Well worth your time this morning. Bloomberg.com is where you'll find it, and of course on the terminal as well. Let's bring you more now, though, on the countdown to the UK budget. On Wednesday, the Prime Minister promising a plan that will change the long-term trajectory on British growth for the better. Our UK politics reporter James Wilcock is with me for more. James, we're expecting to hear from the Prime Minister later today. He's making a speech on the budget. What do we know about what he's going to say?
He faces a very difficult challenge here because all through his time in government, he said that he is pro-growth, pro-worker, pro-business. Those are hard interests to balance. And he's going to be saying that he backs stability, investment and reform, and that only Labour will be making the tough choices that Conservatives have dodged, his words, like over the past 14 years. And so basically he's going to be laying out the case for major economic surgery, which will be coming on Wednesday.
How important is the tone that Keir Starmer strikes in this speech? There's so much anticipation around this budget. We here and everyone else has spent weeks looking to try and work out exactly what they're going to do.
Well, I think it's a sign of the importance that, look, no one pre-announces the budget. And yet, 2 days before the budget, the Prime Minister is making a speech, which is not pre-announcing it. You won't get any measures in the speech. But what it is saying is...
it's vibes.
He knows how important this is. This is possibly one of the most important budgets for the UK since World War II. That, again, that's how Rachel Reeves sees it. And if you compare that to the post-war period and the amount of tax they're going to raise, potentially £40 billion, according to Bloomberg's latest reporting, this is going to define the next decade, if possibly not more, of UK politics. The Prime Minister knows this. And so the tone he's going to strike is one which is both that this is important, this is going to be painful for some people, consumers, non-doms, the wealthy, but is also going to create growth in a way that reassures the markets that this is a government worth trusting. The last thing they want is a Liz Truss moment, and they are very clear about that.
Yeah, indeed. And in fact, the movements that we saw on gilt shields, the UK's borrowing costs last week, of note when we heard about the changes to the fiscal rules. James, there's been so much reporting around what to expect in the budget in terms of individual measures. You alluded to some of them there. Just remind us of some of the things that we are expecting.
I mean, there are so many. This is a very ambitious looking budget. The big stuff, we expect to see capital gains changes to inheritance tax and changes to national insurance on employers. That's our newsroom's latest reporting. There are also stuff I think our listeners should also be paying to. So you might see a freeze on income tax thresholds, commonly called fiscal drag, till 2028, reform to non-doms, changes to the private equity carried interest, and also potentially changes to entrepreneurs who sell their business. Tax relief on those may face a cut too. Those are some of the more business or financial changes. There are still lots more in terms of spending, tax on non-business areas that I can't even have time to cover. It is going to be a big event for the UK fiscal calendar.
Yeah, it certainly is. And of course, full coverage across our platforms on Bloomberg as well. James, we've talked in previous budgets about the rabbit out of the hat moment, and we often listen to a budget speech looking to see what wasn't pre-announced or what wasn't reported on in advance of the event. Is there any room in this budget left for surprises?
There's a lot of room left for surprises. We, as journalists, as the media, have focused a lot on tax and spend, because obviously that's what you do. And obviously, journalists go out and sort of kick the tyres of the administration and see what comes back. There are a lot of non-tax levers Reeves could pull. Take the fiscal rules. We already know that there's potentially a lot of works in there. Reeves has announced as much in editorials. A thing that I've not heard, but could be done, for example, is they could change the inflation target. There are potential for big non-tax levers that the Chancellor could pull that we haven't heard about. It's not all decided yet, and they could still make last-minute changes to decisions. It's all to play for, Stephen. And on Wednesday, we are going to find out a major tentpole that sets the government's agenda for the next 5 years and the future of our economy.
Yeah, indeed. And of course, we will be watching closely to see what details we get. But as you tell us, James, we are in the final countdown now to that budget, and the speech by Keir Starmer today, a key part of setting the tone for that event. That's our UK politics reporter, James Woolcock. Now, oil prices have tumbled after Israeli strikes against targets in Iran on Saturday avoided the country's crude facilities. The limited nature of the attack targeting military sites has raised the prospects for easing hostilities in the Middle East. Our oil reporter Waylon Soon joins us now for more on this story. Waylon, great to have you with us on the programme. Can you talk us through, first of all, the scales of the moves that we're seeing on the oil markets?
When markets opened this morning in Singapore after the weekend, we immediately saw Brent prices falling by more than 5% to about $72 per barrel for Brent and around $68 for West Texas Intermediate. And it's recovered somewhat. It's now around 4.5% for Brent to around $72.60. But it's still a big drop from what we saw last week. That's definitely because the market has had time to digest whatever that's happened over the weekend with what we see coming from the Middle East, where Israel struck some military targets in Iran.
Yeah, of course, it's been watching events in the Middle East has been a key part of tracking what's been happening over oil markets over the past year. What do these moves tell us about how the market is perceiving the situation in the Middle East and perhaps going forward what that might evolve?
Definitely. And I think it's really important to know that the market has had about 2 days to digest whatever that's happened in the Middle East. And we've seen Israel having very limited strikes in Iranian military targets. But to note that there is some of the military targets actually exist in one of its oil-producing provinces. At the same time, you have Iran giving a very measured response to these attacks. And so I think what we see here and what we've been hearing from traders is that the market has had time to digest the news, and it now sees that the geopolitical risk premium that has been pushing oil prices up in recent weeks has sort of faded away overnight. And now the market focus has shifted to the oversupply, potentially an oversupply of crude barrels in the coming months. And that is what we have been noticing in our articles and our news reports in recent weeks, right? You have the OPEC potentially coming on with more production. They have, Saudi Arabia especially, has said that they are willing to end production cuts. So you have this potential glut of crude barrels in the market. And immediately after news of Israel striking Iran, you do see some investment banks like Citibank. They came out with a note this morning in Singapore saying that they are lowering their 12-month forecast of crude barrel prices from $72 to $60 a barrel. So that's a pretty big cut to oil prices.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.